Okay, everybody's late because everybody's just been to the bar. So I'd like to say thank you to all of you here, all 64 of you, because I counted, for not going to the bar and turning up first of all. So they're all pouring in, but I'm going to carry on anyway. Well, that's my name, that's what I do, and that's where I work, basically. If I had to say this in Japanese, my legal department would make me say, Sony Computer Entertainment no Worldwide Studios no Internal Development Bu Japan Studio Creative Director Gavin desu. So I'm not going to say that because that's just too long. Okay. So let's talk about where I come from. I come from a studio called Japan Studio. We're obviously in Japan. We're based in Tokyo. We're based in Shinagawa, which is basically on reclaimed land. So if Tokyo does get the big one, I'll be swimming home that day. We're famous for Eco, Loco Roco, Gravity Rush, Shadow of the Colossus, Patapon, Siren, and most recently last year we released Raid and Puppeteer. And Puppeteer is all my fault, so if you played it and didn't enjoy it, you can beat me up later. Well, I'll be in the bar having a beer. In Japan Studio, we run lots of small teams working on lots of different things at the same time. Our teams are small, even in full development, compared to Western studios. And basically, our mantra at our studio is we make games that you wouldn't normally get on a console. We're not a Naughty Dog or a Santa Monica studio, who are the big Hollywood blockbuster titles. We make more creative, well, that's rude, right there. We make creative titles that are basically, that's our key word, it has to be creative. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. It's about how creativity inspired Puppeteer and how creativity changed the way I make games and will make games from now on, and what the positives and negatives of that was through the process. So to get to that point, I'm going to give you a little history. Years ago, I worked at Sony Computer Entertainment Europe in the London studio, and we made a PS2 game called The Getaway. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But it was a violent, gritty, realistic gangster game. And the rule was that we had to make the most realistic game on the PlayStation 2. That was the order. So we basically found a load of actors and we scanned them all. We then found several London fashion designers, stole their clothes and scanned those on the actors we just scanned. We then did a load of motion capture. I mean, I remember setting up a five-person motion capture shoot back in 1999, with full gloves and voice at the same time. And then we all went out and photographed the whole of London. Came back and made a virtual 25 square kilometer London. Point of advice to anybody who wants to do this, it's not advisable to send your staff out with very expensive cameras to certain parts of the East End, because they tend not to come back, both the cameras and the staff. So with the sequel, we released that game, and it actually was very, very successful. But I'm proud of it. I'm definitely proud of it because it was a very challenging experience to make on a technology side, and it's very realistic. But I didn't feel it was hitting that creative nerve, and I wasn't being creative. So with the sequel coming, I decided to flee to Japan. So I went to, well, I think I landed on the Friday and started work on the Monday, and I was working under Toyama-san. And Toyama-san is famous for the original Silent Hill, and he also made Gravity Rush. But in between those products, he made the Siren series of games, which is basically a violent, gritty, scary horror game set in Japan. Just, we did the same things. We got actors in and we scanned them, we scanned their clothes. There was just more blood on it this time, and there was more blood pouring out of the faces of these people we were scanning. We did a ton of motion capture. And then we set off across Japan into the mountains to find all these deserted villages and spent all our time photographing these villages, coming back and remaking them. Note of point, don't go into the mountains of Japan in the middle of the summer and stay in a deserted village, which is scary as hell. Yeah, I'm never going to do that again. Never. And I love Japan, but I'm never going there again. So basically, I made 4 games by doing the same thing. And none of my creativity, all the stuff that I wanted to make, wasn't being tapped. I was being told what I was supposed to do by the creative director, which is fine, but I wasn't having any of my ideas or input or creativity going the other way, and it was all very realistic and technological. So when that finished, I just needed to break out of that realism box. I needed to let my imagination run riot and let my creativity free. And I had this idea for the game, which is Puppeteer, which is actually a picture book that I wrote for my son when he was born, and I never finished it. So instead, I decided to use Sony's money and make him a game instead. So I knew what I wanted to make. I just couldn't find a place to make it in that would allow people to believe this fantastic world that I wanted to make. And then it dawned on me, the theater, amazing. You walk into a theater, the lights go down, you know, the curtains go up, and you're transported away, and it doesn't matter if it's Peter Pan flying across the audience, you just believe it, which is completely unlike the cinema, where you're just watching a flat screen, and you know it's being filmed, so you're judging the story and you're judging everything. In theater, you don't judge, you're just swept along by it. And I thought, brilliant, I've broken out of this realistic box. I'm a genius. And then I went, idiot, you just put yourself right back in a box, a literal box with curtains on either side of it and a stage at the bottom. How the hell do you make a game inside a theater? And I racked my brains for months on end, couldn't work it. And then I went to watch Bunraku, which is Japanese puppet theater. And if you ever get the chance to go to Japan, I really advise you go and see it. It is amazing. I mean, 3 guys controlling 1 puppet, absolutely stunning. But what was stunning to me was that as this play was going on, all the sets were moving in and out and rotating and changing in front of my eyes. Absolutely incredible. And I went, I'm a genius, I'll do that. So I stole their idea, basically, and basically we would make this magical theater where I could change the backgrounds, the sets, and the environments anytime I wanted, to anywhere I wanted, and the player would never know what was coming next. So I'm going to show you that original concept movie that we made to try and get the game across to the bigwigs in our studio.
Once upon a time, on the moon there lived an evil and wicked king. On the darkest nights, he would leave his black castle to steal the souls of children. He would trap them in wooden puppets and make them do his evil deeds. One of these puppets was just a boy of 8, has suffered that same terrible fate. That night, the darkness visited his house and stole him away to the moon. But a chance encounter with a stuck-up fairy would help him escape. And that's where Kutero's adventures truly begin.
Okay, so you might notice that besides the logo being completely different and the character being different, the core concepts are the same, but the artwork is completely different. And I was living in Japan, and I love Japan. I've been there 11 years now, and I love Japanese culture, and I thought, I want to make this amazing thing based with all these, you know, Japanese stories and everything combined together with Japanese artwork. And then marketing got hold of me by the scruff of the neck and said, no, we love the concept, we think it's awesome, but we can't sell it because it's too Japanese. Now, it didn't sell anyway, which is another point. We won't get into that discussion, but, right? If you really want to make a game, you have to change things. So I changed the way it was going to look, but I was going to do it on my terms, and marketing weren't going to see what it was going to be. They just knew I was going to change the art look, and that's what I told them. And so I went back to some of my roots, and I love Tim Burton and Terry Gilliam. I love their creativity and what they do, and so I was going to go along that darker story side. And that was a really good thing for us, because that actually meant that then when we wrote the story, it could be much darker, and that we could put in some stuff that was pretty dark, that adults would get upset about, but kids love, but at the same time, we could put in a load of Monty Python British humor, which is what I really, really wanted to do. So we did keep 3 of the original core values, and I have this thing about 3s. Human beings tend to like odd things. Apparently, users of smartphones, both Android and iPhone, like 3s as well. It's a very popular game, I hear. But 3 is a really good number. It's a triumvirate. It's something that I always try and base my games on, 3 key features that hold a game together and basically help each other out. So the first was going to be the scissors. Now, I knew I wanted a kind of an Excalibur-type weapon or something in the game that had to run in the story, but I didn't want a sword, but I wanted scissors. Now, the original concept had scissors, but the first prototype we made had a sword in it, because that's what the team wanted. And they put it in, and then 3 hours later, we took it out, because it didn't work. And the reasons are, 1, with the scissors, it gave you an ability where you could actually not only use it as a weapon, but you could actually use it to fly. Because as long as you were cutting, you could keep moving through the air, which meant you could get to places you couldn't normally get to, which meant that we could broaden out of that trapped box that we were stuck into and scroll the stage, in effect. Secondly, scissors are the second tool that your parents give you. They give you crayons, right? And then you draw all over their walls. And then they think that's bad enough, so they give you a pair of scissors, and then you cut everything up that they've spent all their hard-earned money on and tell you not to run with them, so then you run around with them. So we all know what scissors are all over the world. Everybody knows what a pair of scissors is, and they know what it does. It's intuitive. And thirdly, it's the sound they make. Everybody knows that sound, and it's a rhythmic sound when you cut objects. So in the game, you can actually cut to your pace and to your timing, and it feels good to you. Obviously, we had the theater, never knowing what was coming next. It was always going to change on you. You were going to be surprised. And then thirdly, we had the puppet. And we spent hours, every day for at least a month trying to work out a live system for this game. And we threw every day a different live system into the game. And we couldn't work out something that would link back to the puppet. And we were sitting around the meeting room there. I think there were 8 of us. One of the guys had a Lego Star Wars character. I think it was Darth Vader or Chewbacca, I can't remember. But we were kind of arguing and saying, no, that won't work, this will work. And he just ripped the head off this thing in anger. And we all looked at him and went, oh my God, that's it. We'll use his head as the live system. And that became the third core of our gaming experience. And the heads are really good because, as it says, decapitation is fun. The 15th century French know that very well. But, it's a really good system because you get hit, your head falls off, and you have 3 seconds to pick it back up. And it induces a little ping of panic into the player to get their life back. So they scurry after it. And if they get it, then they get a little hint of satisfaction because they succeeded in something. Okay. So we'd basically been greenlit, and we knew what we wanted to make, but we only had 14 people. I told you we had 4 small teams. How do you make this game? It's a huge game. It's a 10-plus hour game. The quality of this game is ridiculous. So we had 14 guys, and I just went back to the old days. I went back to the days when I was doing pixel games and said, we used to make games with 4 or 5 guys. We can do this. So there were programmers, designers, artists, animators, characters, lighting effects, and myself. So what we decided to do was we'd gray box the whole game. And we make the whole game, but we didn't have enough designers to do this. So everybody was gray boxing. Everyone. We weren't relying on game designers to do this. The animators were doing it. Everybody was writing those little scripts and doing it and putting it in. And suddenly we were having discussions about this all together, just 14 of us. We were playing these levels, we were changing levels, people were inputting new things that they wanted to put in, and suddenly we felt really creative, and there was lots of fun and lots of discussion was going on. And grey boxing the whole game meant that we fine-tuned and refined it down to what we wanted, right? But it wasn't a democracy. Yeah, I'm a creative director. You know, if it was fun, it goes in and it stuck. If it didn't feel what I wanted in the game, then it didn't go in. But that was fine because they were having fun coming up with ideas as well. And then while we were doing that, every time we thought we had a level done, we would then do image boards. Now, it sounds obvious, right? But why did we do this? Well, we actually drew over 600 image boards, every gimmick, every character, every level. And there are two reasons. One is speed, because we knew we were going to have to ramp up. We couldn't do that game with that number of people. So all these people who didn't know what the game was, they could take the grey box area, they could take the image board, and then the artists and animators could make that level. Fine. But the other problem we had was visibility. You know, Puppeteer has layers of background behind it, and it's a platform game, and you can't see your character, right? So we would have to design every level to make sure that the colors and the shapes didn't interfere around certain gimmicks to stop you playing. Okay, so here's an example of that. At the top, you can see this amazing grey box that we made, absolutely amazing. That's actually from Act 6, from Old London Town in the Land of Time, where you're chasing a rabbit across, and you can see the grey box, and then you can have the gimmick explanation there, and then you can see the image boards there on the right that we did, and the screenshot at the bottom. That's not a final screenshot, by the way. It's just one I picked out of the bin. But that process really saved us a lot of time. Okay, so we grey boxed, had our image boards, we were going to ramp up. Now, in the West, and admittedly, I haven't made a game in the West for 11 years, so I don't know if you guys do it this way, but we used to have this thing called simultaneous construction at Sony, where you suddenly get green lit, and you hadn't got your systems ready, but you made the whole game together. Yeah, great, we're moving forward. The whole game being done at the same time. And then you get to alpha and you panic and you go into crunch and you start crying a lot, right? In the East, it's core construction. You make your base, right? And then you grow it out from there, slowly grow it out, and it gets bigger and bigger. Now, both have positives and negatives. I mean, you still have alpha, panic, and crunch in that core construction, right? But both have positives and negatives on both sides. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to make a vertical slice. I wasn't going to prove anything to anybody. Yeah, I didn't want to do that either. I don't agree with vertical slices. I think they're absolute bullshit. I'm going to swear, sorry. They don't prove anything to anyone, okay? Less alone the marketing guys who are going to look at it, because they don't know what they're even looking at. We decided to take a little bit from the West and a little bit from the East and make one level. Now, in Puppeteer, what we were going to do is actually make Act 1. And if you know Puppeteer, that's an hour and a half of gameplay, okay? But we were going to make it to 90% quality, and that would give us all our systems working properly, the way we move from the curtain to the next curtain to the next curtain, etc. Every flow, every piece of gameplay. It didn't have all the gimmicks in it, and it didn't have all the heads in it, and it didn't have all of this stuff in it, but it was a contained piece that would work. And we did it because the team, what is 90% quality? I mean, I knew what 90% quality was in my head, but they're not brain mind readers, and they didn't know. And my Japanese is good, but even so, right? And a schedule. How long would one act take to make? How many people would we need to finish the game by the time that Sony wanted it out? Secondly, and they're going to kill me for saying this. I wish this was alcohol. Powers that be. I've been in the industry 22 years, and I can't tell you how many games I've worked on that have been canned, right? And no fault of your own either, just that people above you just don't get what you're trying to do, or somebody spent too much money on another project, so you don't have enough money to do your project, etc. So I decided that making one level meant that we had something that when the powers that be deigned to come down to the 14th floor of my skyscraper in Tokyo from the godly heavens above, they would actually have something that was 90% quality that they could play, that they could be reassured with, and they would trust us to make the rest of the game. And that saved my ass on numerous occasions. Thirdly, marketing. We don't want to get into this conversation either. Marketing are very straightforward, and they look at holes in their segments, and they go, yeah, we need a first-person shooter in this quarter, and we need this here and that sort of, but they don't understand games. They don't know what a game is. In fact, they don't play games. But if you miscommunicate to them what your game is from the first time they see it, they'll only ever think your game is that. And that's it. They're stuck. It's like you've just kind of molded their brain waves into a kind of segment, and they'll never change. They can't change. So they would look at this level, they would know what it was, and then they could see what it was. Also, what's interesting about this, if you played Puppeteer, Act 1 is a very dark Tim Burton inside the castle look that they loved, right? What they didn't know, I didn't show them Act 2, which is the Japanese level. You see, so I gave them what they wanted, and then they stayed away, they were happy, and that was fine. And lastly for that is promotion. I've worked on a lot of product where you're working to get the game out, and everybody's really in crunch time, and then people come along and say, can you make a trailer, and can you get some screenshots out, and can you do this and all of that? And you have to, the team has to stop dead, right? And then you have to shift all your resources over to making that stuff, and then the game schedule slips. So that Act 1 actually was used at Gamescom. It was actually used for a Tokyo press tour at the Tokyo Game Show, and actually it was also used to convince Latin America, who turned down the game originally, when they saw that they wanted it, and they took it up, and then I was invited to Brazil and showed off the Tiger Battle at a Sony press conference on stage. So it was actually an incredibly useful thing to do. So let's have a look at that Gamescom. This is going to make me very nostalgic. Gamescom trailer.
Welcome to the magical theater of the strange and fantastic. Go and bring him to me!
You better follow that fork. The witch doesn't take kindly to long waits.
Hurry up!
Are you the new boy? I suppose you're looking to get your soul back and hurry home. Well, you'll just have to march those wooden legs up to the Moonbear King's throne room and rescue Calibris from his clutches. You can do it.
Back my scissors!
You might notice that apart from the amazing Stephen Grief, who's the narrator who did the whole game in the end, every voice in there was mine. And I apologize profusely for that in the first place. There was one time where I believed that I was going to do all the voices in the game because I was insane and thought I was a great actor. I actually did record all the voices in the game as placeholders, and then was playing the game continuously and driving myself insane, listening to myself, until my European producer saved me and said, for God's sakes, get that crappy voice out of the game and let's go and record with professional actors, which we did in the end of the day. So don't do it. You will go insane. Okay, so let's get back to creativity. That's where we want to go. So who's our most vital asset? Because for me, it's the people I work with, because they're full of creativity and full of ideas. Now, in a typical game structure, a typical team structure, you have the creative director, right, who's God, right? And then you have your leads below that, and they're basically your high priests. And then everybody else who makes the game is basically sacrificial offerings. So God gives the word, the priests listen to it, they interpret it in different ways. The priests don't talk to each other, and then sometimes they talk to the people beneath them, the sacrificial offerings, and sometimes they don't. There is no communication at all. And most of the time, if there is communication, it's miscommunicated. Okay? And that miscommunication breeds basically disinterest from the staff, because they don't know what's going on. They don't know why they're making something or why they're moving forward in that direction. And that disinterest breeds hatred. And I have worked on a lot of games in the years, and I've heard, I hate this game. And in fact, I could be rich if I got money for every time I heard that. Well, probably about $20. But people say it. You'd be surprised. You know, you go outside with them for a cigarette, or you go down the pub with them and they have a few drinks, and it comes out. I hate working on this. I wish I was working on something else. And in turn, that breeds robots. We just put cogs into place. We might as well be building cars, but they have robots for that, so we make games instead. So I really enjoyed the way we made the grey box with all that input from the staff. It felt like the old days I used to work in, and I wanted to do that the same. So we decided that we would build a core, and the core existed on myself, my lead game designer, and the programmers, basically. And then we would build all these satellite teams out of our team, okay? So that you basically had a designer, 2 animators, and BG artists. The character guys would sit off to one side, because they were kind of loners anyway, so they weren't really interested in this. And these people, basically, we ran a form of agile. Now, I'm sure there are tons of agile talks here at GDC, and you can go and get the books, and it's really boring, and you'll never finish them. You'll fall asleep before you get to the end of the book. But we just ran a very simple sprint of 2 weeks. And basically, on a Monday morning, I would sit down with all the teams, and I would say, please make this. That's what I want in 2 weeks. And at the end of those 2 weeks, we would do a review with the whole team together. Okay? And then I would say if I liked it or not, and what was good or what wasn't. But what I also said was, in those 2 weeks, if you have time and you have ideas, put in what you want to. And suddenly, in these reviews, and it took a long time to get this right with the Japanese team, I can tell you, because they're not into being the ones that stand up and raise their hand and make points. So it took a long time to lift them out of their, you know, the I am God thing and I must obey God sort of thing over here. But it started, and suddenly I started to see things that I hadn't asked for coming into the game, and they started to make me laugh. And they started to make me go, wow, that's really cool. I wish I'd thought of that. Maybe I'm in the wrong job. Maybe this person should be doing my job instead. And suddenly, every team started to do it. And every team, because they saw that I was impressed and it went in the game. So suddenly, they were competing against each other. And it was awesome. And they were having fun, and they were talking. They weren't just talking in their teams. They were talking to other teams. They were talking to the core. And everybody was talking. Absolutely incredible. Especially for a Japanese team. So what did that give us? Team trauma. So we liked this side of the slide on the left. We had communication. They were being challenged. It bred creativity. They were allowed to put their ideas into the game, which gave them ownership of the game. It was no longer Gavin's game. It was the Puppeteer team's game, and they would proudly say it to any other team that asked. It's our game. And that gave us a great quality jump because people were interested. They were into the game. They wanted to make it good, so the quality went up. And people didn't, you know, leave early. Not that you leave early in Japan anyway, but they were actually working instead of, you know, looking what was going on Google.com or whatever they were searching at the time. And our output went up. But what it did, because I had opened this creative Pandora's box and it wasn't going to go back in, there was no way I could rule to them that they couldn't do this anymore, it suddenly meant we had unchecked chaos. So in a sprint, they were throwing in so much stuff that I didn't know what was going to go in my game anymore, but it wasn't my game anymore, so I didn't really have the right to tell them not to put it in. I could only tell them at the review that I didn't like it and they had to take it out. So I had to then, with my lead designer, every day go to every team and work out what they were doing and make sure that they were keeping the game constant and moving in the right direction that we needed to go. And it was really hard on 3 factors of making games. One of those was story, because if you play Puppeteer, the whole game's narrated, and everything was changing. We were doing daily 2-hour rewrites, all the way up until alpha, to put in all this creative stuff that they were putting in. Another part was sound. Sound didn't have a clue what was going on. I mean, sound anyway live in another world, right? They live in their studios, right? And they very rarely come and visit you and find out what's going on anyway, but they had no idea what was to make. So we were trying to drag them in all the time and tell them what the changes were, and they were kind of, you know, basically imploding in on themselves. They couldn't deal with it. And then lastly was lighting and effects, because lighting and effects can't move if it's not final, because there's no point, really, at the end of the day. So what we did, we moved, basically the writing team just had to suck it up. That's the only way we dealt with that one. Yeah, that was the only way we dealt with that one. It wasn't a very good solution to that. The other ones we moved back in the sprint, so they were running literally 4 weeks off everybody else. Okay. Craftsmanship. After Gamescom, after doing that speech on stage, I was sat on a panel with, you know, Yoshida-san Shuhei and various game creators, and it was a discussion about are games art? And they all went down going, yes, games are art, yes, games are art, yes. And I just went, God, this is going to be the most boring panel ever if I say, yes, games are art, right? So I said, no, games are craft. And why are they craft? Because we spend a very long time honing our skills and trying to get better and better at the things we do. And that's the epitome of a craftsman. That is craftsmanship. Now in Japan there's a word, and that's the kanji for it, kodawari, which is obsession and fixation. Sounds bad, right? Sounds like I'm a stalker. Yeah? And we have those kind of stalkers in Japan, so it's not that, I shouldn't make jokes about it. But it's actually a really good thing in Japanese. I mean, you've all seen Jirojims of sushi, right? That level of perfection, which is unattainable. You can never achieve the best. And I generally believe that my staff have that. And they wanted to make everything perfect, which was particularly difficult because I wanted variation. And I didn't mean variation just in gameplay or just in where you went or all those sort of things. I meant variation. I told them they could not use the same model in any other part of the game that they just put into that level. They could not use the same animation, apart from player character animation, than in the game at all. So there were bands of animators roaming around the studio, you know, going after my blood because of this, you would think. No, because we'd given them ownership over the product. And they wanted to do that. They wanted to make this thing that was so full of amazing things that you would never see twice. So that's an incredible thing. If you give people the ownership over the product, then you can give them ridiculous orders. And they'll try and do it for you because they believe it's correct. And beer helps a lot. In Japan, right, there's a really good thing that they do where basically you all go out drinking together, and as the boss, it means that you basically are going to get beaten up. They have the right to abuse you verbally, sometimes physically, but they can literally get everything off their chest in that night in that drunken night, and then the next day it's all forgotten, never brought up again. So we drank a lot, and they abused a lot. But they were craftsmen and not robots now, and that was the amazing thing. So I spent all this time trying to make a world where you could do anything that you wanted. I was getting rid of realism, and then suddenly I went, oh my God, come back realism, I need you, and how ironic the whole thing was, because the theatre was real. I didn't really realize it at the time, that if I wanted to have a 50-foot tiger and my hero riding on the back of a flamingo across a dragon in a thunderstorm, I needed a sense that you were still in the theatre, that was real to the player, that they were there so they could believe the stuff that was in front of them. So we spent a huge amount of time investigating theatres, and we couldn't do it graphically because you don't see anything apart from the edge of the stage. We tried lots of audience, people in front, it just got in the way. So we did it with sound. Sound where, you know, from the start of the game, from the start screen, you can hear the audience murmuring, you can hear the orchestra tuning up, and you can hear the narrator saying stupid things like, turn off your flashy ringtone because I don't want to hear it in my stupendous show, all these sort of things. But not only that, we actually went and recorded the sound for the audience in London, in a real theatre, as if all the mics were based on the position of you sitting where you are in front of the TV. We kind of worked it all out. Well, I didn't. A clever person did. And spent a lot of money on it. I think it was really worth it. And the funny thing is, you know, when you play Puppeteer, you hear the audience, and the audience kind of cheer you on and ask what's going on and all of that sort of stuff. That didn't come until way late. And the reason for that was that I work late, I go home, my family are asleep, but I want to play a game. So I start playing a game, you know, and I clear a level, and I'm like, yeah, I'm awesome. I cleared that level, and then you turn around, there's nobody there. You don't get rewarded for it. You know, you don't get that recognition for it. So we put that in to give the player that recognition, or because I'm selfish and I wanted to play my own game and get cheered on because my son had gone to bed. Both things, really. And then finally, the lighting for us. Lighting was an incredible thing. The lights that you see in Puppeteer actually are the London Palladium's lighting rig that we stole from a book. We investigated lots and lots of different theatres and their lighting rigs and stuff, and a really clever lead artist of mine, Komiya-san, made this amazing system with rendering lights, so you could do the whole thing in real time. Straight as the game was playing, you could change all the lights real time, everything. It's 148 lights in that game being played at once, casting shadows all over the place. And then we realized that we spent all that time in the image board stage making our character stand out, and now we had 148 lights blasting at our character, and all the shadows were all the way up the back, and you couldn't see where the character was at all. Amazing. So we put the spotlight in there. Obviously that helped, but we couldn't do it. People were playing it, and they were falling down holes and everything. We couldn't work out why. Until one day, we realized that the shadow wasn't underneath the player, and when you jump in the air, your shadow is cast down. Normally you just, in a 2D game, you will cast the shadow down so you know where you are, physical to where the background is. So after spending all this time making this amazing lighting system, which looks amazing, we actually went back to an old school thing where we actually just projected a polygon with a black circle on it underneath the player so that you could actually see where you are, and it fixed the whole problem. So eventually we kind of made pure magic with those two things. We brought realism back to life. Won't do that yet. The last thing I want to talk to you about is focus testing. Because we were making our levels, which were acts, individual acts, about an hour and a half each, and we were doing them to 90%, every time these acts came in, we could focus test them. So by the time that we'd focus tested everything, which was pre-alpha, and we'd actually put all the feedback from focus testing into the game, we didn't have anything much to do. And it's the only game that I've ever worked on where it was the hardest game I've ever made up until alpha, and then after that it was like, I think we had 300 bugs. I've never done anything like that before in my life. I was gobsmacked. I mean, I had programs sitting around going, what do I do now? I don't know. Wait till the bug report comes in. It'll come in and be like 5 bugs. Fix those. And it was bizarre. And that focus testing did that for us. It was making sure that we were of that quality to go into the focus test, getting the feedback, making sure our schedule had enough time to fix it, and then moving on. Last thing I'm going to say about sound, I was an animator. 70% of animation is sound. I believe in sound. Lots of people don't believe in sound in their games. Somebody said to me, I'm going to swear. Okay, I'm going to swear right now. Metacritic. Right? We all hate it, right? Yeah? Yeah, right, yeah. But sound is 20 to 25% of your Metacritic score with 10% of your budget. So it's really worth concentrating on your sound and getting some amazing sound in the game. Okay, finally, what's next? Now here are some bizarre numbers for you. The top one is my age. Okay? The next number is the average life expectancy of an American Caucasian male. And I know I'm not an American Caucasian male, but I look like one, so we'll take that number as read. And then if you take 44 away from 76.19 and divide it by 3.5, which is the average time to make a new IP of a size of Puppeteer, then you get 9 games left in my life. And then I'll take the 197142857142857 as my retirement fund. It's interesting. I think I have more than 9 games in my life, and even though I love making Puppeteer, it was kind of been making very big games all the time, and I want to move away from packaging. I don't believe there's a future for it. I think we're too reliant on stores to sell our product for us, and we owe it to ourselves to get as much of our creative ideas out there into the world as possible for people to play. So I'm going to move away from that and keep the working style that I have with my teams, break the team up so it's even smaller, and make 3 or 4 products at once. And then put them up on the net somewhere for people to download them. Okay, let's do questions, if there are any questions.
Hello. Earlier you mentioned that you were working with a Japanese team and you wanted to lift them out of the typical team structure, and that it was a real struggle. But you didn't go into the details of how you did that. Do you mind explaining how you overcame the struggle to get them to start competing and talking with each other?
I think it's a lot. Sorry, the question is, how do you get a Japanese team to break out from normal structure, which is, the creative director, everything he says is, and that's it, and nobody gets an idea or put in it. How do you get them to get their ideas out? You do that by basically forcing them to do it. It sounds bizarre, but you say at the beginning, we realized they weren't doing it, even though we told them to do it, and we got to the point where it was, you have to put one idea in. And then that suddenly grew, and suddenly it was 10 ideas. And then it became kind of panic time on my side to try and stop them doing it. But unfortunately, it was almost impossible. But you have to kind of, some people like to talk, and some people are very vocal. And, when somebody's very vocal, and the other people want to say something, but they're kind of shouted down, and you have to kind of say to those teams, look, everybody has the right to do something. And what we would do is we would use another aspect of Agile, which was destroy the known world of trees by using Post-it notes, that every team would get a day, 1 hour to come up with ideas, and in that time they had to be quiet for 10 minutes and write down their ideas on Post-it notes and then put them up on the wall. And then everybody could look at them in that team and say, that's a really good idea. And it stopped that vocality of somebody shouting down somebody else. So that's basically how we did it.
Thank you.
Hi there, Gavin. We met at E3 and you told me you made Puppeteer because your son he left the controller because it said every game was the same.
Yeah.
How did your son respond to Puppeteer?
Yeah, so the question is that I basically made Puppeteer because my son was bored with gaming, which was bad for me as a creative director of a gaming company, but great as a father because he could go out and play outside. how did I get him to respond to Puppeteer? He actually loves Puppeteer, and it's kind of funny because we played up to the end of Act 6, and I said, oh, okay, give me a score. Go on, give me a score, out of 100. And he said, 93. I went, oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. And then the next day we finished off Act 7. I said, okay, give me a score now. And he said 200. And I went, why? And he went, my names were in the credits. So if you really want to impress somebody, put their name in the credits and they'll be happy for you. Okay.
Wonderful game.
Thank you.
I thought it was absolutely brilliant. One of the things that you were talking about earlier where you kind of they got to run wild with their imagination, right? And then you wanted to pull back and bring in the realism again. One of the things that kind of struck me a little bit, and we came in a little bit late, so maybe you had touched on it, but early on in that conceptual video, the very first thing you see is the strings getting cut. And so, as a puppeteer in game, you imagine that you would just see the strings flying all over the thing, so you kind of relate to the player that this is still a theatrical performance. And so what was your design decisions, that kind of led to that not being in the game?
That opening basically didn't work for me because his soul had been spirited away and not him. And his soul had been put into the puppet that the Moonbed King was making in that Black Castle, Grizzlestein. So to have him come in on strings like that, it didn't feel powerful enough to me. It felt like a soft start. Mm-hmm. Whereas having him in that opening where the first time you see him is basically, he's on strings, if you notice, but he's being held by the Moonbed, and he grabs him, and the strings are automatically severed by the Moonbed King's fingers. So it's almost like his magic is doing that. So it is there, it's just not very visible.
Right.
But the powerful thing was him having his head ripped off and eaten, and then thrown away, discarded. And then the journey is that he is not trying to get his head back. It's a metaphorical journey about him being a kid and actually knowing who he is. So when you get to the end of the game, spoiler alert, because none of you bought it anyway, the thing is that he gets told he could have gone home any time if he'd believed in himself. But he does by that point, so he doesn't need his head back, even though it's been crushed by the Moonbed King.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Sonja van Vuren. Puppeteer is really one of my favorite games of this year, and I especially love the General Tiger, not really because how it looks, but it reminded the sound, it really reminded me of Tim Curry. Is that a coincidence, or how did you get to that?
So does General Tiger, General Tiger basically reminds you of Tim Curry.
Yeah.
Well, Tim Curry is one of my favorite actors.
Mine too.
So, I mean, Rocky Horror Picture Show or Legend or anything like that. Absolutely stunning. So, but that smarminess that exists in his acting is absolutely amazing. I think he's amazing in Clue, actually. If you've ever seen Clue, he's just amazingly smarmy in that. And that's what the Tiger is. He's, if you look at him, he's all down at the little people, but when it comes to the Moonbed King, he's completely petrified.
Yeah.
The lines in there that we were writing to get that across, for instance, right at the beginning when the Moonbed King stomps off and he's talking about his, the tiger saying, well, what about your blood pressure, or would you like a glass of warm milk, or and all these sort of things, like trying to, get to him. It's very that Tim Curry type of feel. But when the Moonbed King's not there, is the other side of Tim Curry. So yeah, well spotted.
Yeah, well, thanks. Awesome stuff.
Hi.
Hello. First of all, as a side note, please just don't abandon packages just yet. I know this sounds weird, but I come from Latin America, and the only way I could get the game was through a package box.
Yeah.
So I know this sounds extremely weird, but
well, how about I'll give you a package version in Latin America, and then we'll do it in Europe and America. We'll do it online. I'll talk to the guys at Sony Latin America about that.
I mean, I know it's weird that Sony doesn't have that store there.
I understand.
I mean, and I totally love the game, so I was wondering, out of curiosity, if you already have one of those 9 games. I
have actually 4 ideas, which should be in presentable form by the time I get back to Japan next week. So I will be presenting those, and we'll see what the powers that be say about them.
So, and thank you very much for an extremely original and beautiful game.
Oh, pleasure. Glad you enjoyed it.
You'd mentioned that when you first pitched the game that marketing said no way because it would never sell.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned a couple times that it hasn't sold.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could just speak about your experience with that, how you want to deal with
Speak
that
about my
kind of thing.
hatred and bitterness about
Right,
marketing.
because you've got something that's obviously so different and wonderful.
I think well, I've had, I know what the sales figures are. I don't think it's not a disaster by any way. And, it's kind of interesting when you deal with marketing that they kind of say things because they have to say things rather than they actually knowing what they're talking about sometimes. And we unfortunately listen to them because we believe that they're the upstanding professionals that they're supposed to be. So, but they're also grasping at straws the same way we are when we make games. Who's going to buy it? We don't know. I mean, I've had hits and I've had misses, and Puppeteer I wouldn't really call a miss because it's such a personal project to me. It's something that I think a lot of people out there have got some, real fun and value out of. I mean, one of my favorite reviews is on Amazon.com by somebody called Depressed Gamer, who wrote, "I've suffered from depression for the last 5 years, and really my life has been terrible, but the only thing that ever makes me carry on are games, and this game just brought a smile to my face." So, I'd rather do it for that and move on with that than really care about the sales at the end of the day. For me, with the marketing thing, yeah, I wish I hadn't changed it, to be perfectly honest. But there's serendipity there as well. Changing things can lead to good things, and it did lead to a really great thing. So, it's worth listening sometimes, and the other times it's worth, keeping your ears shut. But.
Thank you.
But also, I will say that releasing at the same week as GTA 5 doesn't help your product.
So thanks for the game. Thanks for the whole team. I'll bring that back to Japan. You mentioned that you guys set up with a core team and then basically kind of set up little mini teams per act, by the sound of it. Would you do that again?
With a different type of game, you mean?
With a different type of game.
Yeah.
The reason why I ask is I'm setting up a game right now that's episodic, and what you described is my plan. I'm having a hard time communicating it and the benefits of it to the guys that are going to be working on those teams.
I would definitely do it again. I think you can do it in any game. I think I don't know, Madden might be a little difficult or something like that, but anything that requires creativity or input from the greatest asset, which is all of you guys here, it's vital. I mean, I'm not an island. I'm not a genius. I'm just a guy who makes games for a living, and the help that I could get. One thing I didn't tell you guys, it didn't just matter with the team. This actually went into, we have a group called PDSG, it's Product Development Support Group, who do like sounds, effects and music and stuff like that, and they also did the cutscenes, the demos in the game. When I flew to San Diego to see them, and I pitched all these guys, and they've taken a lot of freelancers out of Hollywood, right? And I was pitching the game, and they were all like, all these freelance animators and environment artists were all really up for this. And I said, oh, by the way, if you want to put anything in, you can put stuff in. You can change it. And they all looked at me like, what? Because basically they deal with Hollywood, and they were like, we can have input into what we're creating. And I went, yeah, of course you can. And the one prime example of that is there's a scene where Kutaro is being badgered by Picarina, and the bus go past with all the dark soldiers, right? And she goes, you're famous, and no, you're infamous. And he holds up his scissors, and a lightning bolt shoots down and hits his scissors, right? And that was put in by them. So they were picking up on that kind of parody and stuff that we were putting in, and they were putting it in on their side. And it happened there, it happened in our user testing team. They could be as free of the questions they wanted to ask and stuff. We had, it was just, I can't do it on my own. So it was basically me wanting them to be creative because I was being lazy. So I think you can do it.
So just a quick follow-up on that. Did you run all of these content teams in parallel?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah, completely working on stuff together. You just have to, you might be working like I do in Japan until midnight and going home on the last train because you have to be on top of it all the time. It's not something you can kind of, you know, step out, and you need another really good right-hand man who knows exactly what's going on at the same time, because you're going to get called away to other things, to look at other things, to do other things, you know, for a couple of days or a week or something. So you need another guy there to be there doing it for you at the same time, on the same wavelength. Okay. Okay, lastly, there's one thing. We make games. It's kind of funny, but we don't have enough fun. Please have fun when you make games. And you're creative. You are the best asset in the studio. You are amazing. And please make good craft. And I'm serious about this because I want to play your games. And if it's really good craft, I'm definitely going to buy it. Right? So, thank you very much.